today. I think we will be done a little on the early side. The agenda, and you have a hard copy in front of you. We have the agenda, the minutes. We'll do the quarterly report, the market update, the summary of the TAN and the lease that was done last month. And Bruce Harris is going to join us around 8:30 to talk about advisory committees and operating the sunshine. We usually do this presentation once every couple of years, and we're due. So this is a little light agenda, so I squeezed it in on this one. And then finally, we have the election of officers. So while you're going through the meeting, if anybody's interested in being chair or vice chair, just keep that in mind. We'll do that at the end of the meeting. There is a limit. There is term limits, but none of them pertain. So any of you can be chair or vice chair, and I will let you all make that decision at the end of the meeting. Okay, so I guess first thing we need to make sure everybody's good. I'll hand it over to Rick to run the meeting.
Let's turn around. Let's find an introduction to people in our folks here. You want to start over here?
Barbara McQuinn, School Board, District 1.
Paul Dumars, Finance Committee.
Jack Warner, Finance Committee, and as I mentioned to several of you, now again a full-time resident of the state of Florida.
Yay.
Bill McDaniel, Finance Committee.
George Elmore, Finance Committee.
Rick Miller, Finance Committee.
Bill Moore, Finance Committee.
Good morning, everybody. Stephen Alexander with PFM.
Leanne Evans, School District.
Brenda Giampetti, School District.
Ron Huron, School District.
Claire Littlejohn from the General Counsel's Office.
Mike Baldwin from Jeffries. Where are your colleagues here?
No. They all looked at the agenda. They all looked at the agenda and decided to come to the December meeting.
Great. All right, so approval of the agenda is the first order of business. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Opposition? And approval of the minutes of August 9.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Any opposition? Motion carries. So public comments. Mike, have you already given yours? Or do you have any more public comments? Okay.
It's not coming on.
So the first item is the quarterly investment report. That's Steve.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well, and it's finally Friday. And hopefully we can get through this day without any major market situations. I wanted to just go over a couple market themes today and then talk a little bit about what the Fed has done and kind of make sure it's related to Palm Beach and our own situation, so keep it all relevant. I think some of the major characteristics that I think most people are talking about, of course, is that the Fed cut rates twice this year already. I still think this is quite a contrast to where we were in the first few weeks of December of last year, where we expected to have 4 rate increases this year based on December. And then, of course, you know that December was a pivotal point in the economy, both from a domestic and global situation where the Fed, after seeing a global slowdown, decided to not have 4 rate increases this year and went into a cutting mode. And I thought that was, from a historical perspective, was a kind of a unique situation. We both had the fixed income and the equity markets really drop considerably in the month of December of last year, and that really changed the whole outlook for this year. And the Fed said they were going to go into a rate cutting mode, and they have. So we've had 2 rate cuts this year, and of course we've seen basically a slowing growth of this second half of this year, really stemmed by the slowing down in manufacturing. And then, of course, I can't say enough about the whole tariff and battle with China. That's just kind of looms over the entire economy, both worldwide, domestically. It is a big issue and has been on the front burner of many economic discussions and where are we going to be in 2020. So it's been a really big issue that, if you think back over the last couple of years ago, that was not something people expected to have in front of us like it is right now. So it is a situation that I would probably say kind of relates to what Ben Bernanke did with the liquidity situation during the Great Recession here. some of the things that he took in action was really the first time in American history. And I think this whole trade battle situation is kind of a unique situation that we have not seen. So there's a lot of issues here. Those issues have been driving investors around the world to buy more treasuries. And as we see that, that's part of the reason you've seen the curve keep getting pushed down on the longer end, which is part of the reason we have this inverted yield curve, specifically on the short end versus the long end, because there has been a higher demand for treasuries, given the fact there's about 22 countries around the world that have negative interest rates on their sovereign debt. So when you look, comparatively speaking, to U.S. Treasury market, we look very, very attractive, and despite the fact that we're seeing low interest rates. So those are some unique situations that will be with us for some time. When you look at the labor market, we did see a deceleration here on the third quarter. The U.S. economy only added 136,000 jobs, where we were on pace for 223. So a little bit of a slowdown there. And the wage growth also slowed down to 2.9. That wage growth had actually been doing pretty well in 2018, and we saw that wage growth move up, but it is definitely have been slowing down. So we're starting to feel a little bit of these little slowdowns here and there. Interesting enough, the U.S. equity still had a pretty good month in September. If you look at the equities, it doesn't really lend itself to any indication of a recession or a slowdown. So we do have kind of this bifurcation of the economy where the equity market looks pretty strong. The yield curve is kind of showing us that maybe there's a potential for recession coming because of its inverted yield curve. So we do have some mixed messages here. So we'll have to see how this sort of plays out. From an economic growth standpoint, with about 2.3% on GDP. You can see how that sort of stepped down from where we had over the last couple years here, but still a bit of a slower growth. The unemployment rate, though, as it says here, hit a 50-year low. I mean, that's pretty respectful, as we see the unemployment rate has dropped. I don't have it on this chart, but the labor participation rate has been inching up. So we've got a little bit better participation, but there is quite a need for folks to fill a lot of jobs that are available, especially in the tourism, sort of the restaurant, the hotels, business. We're seeing an uptick in construction. Florida right now leads the country in new construction. I mean, there isn't a place in Florida that doesn't have a crane or two up and building. So there is a shortage of construction workers. One of the biggest jobs that is in demand right now in Florida is construction management. It's folks who have a 4-year degree in construction management is one of those new hot areas that there is a demand for folks to fill. So Florida is leading that. Obviously, as you know, that when the economy goes bad, we lead it going the other way too. So we're kind of in we do have both ends can be good or bad for us. But yeah, the unemployment rate, as you can see here, 3.5, keeps ticking down as we move through this year. 30-year fixed mortgage average has been decreasing. If you haven't bought a house recently, now's probably a good time to do it. The mortgage rates are definitely low. As you can see, housing starts over here, moving up, highest since 2007. It doesn't look that way across all states on a uniform basis, but basically on a national average. And I think Florida actually has a higher number than what we're seeing on a national level. Well, this is a good time to spend some time on this chart here. This is on over here on this part of the curve, part of the chart, excuse me, is what the Federal Reserve really looks at here as far as inflation. This is a pretty good gauge of when we expect the Fed to either raise interest rates or to cut interest rates based on the core PCE. As you can see, it is less than a 2% inflation target. And that decline that you see right here in this area kind of is the reason the Fed had to cut rates as opposed to raise interest rates. As you can see, we had been in this kind of a rate rising mode over here, and then it kind of flipped as I talked about the whole December situation, and the Fed had to start cutting interest rates, and it kind of has worked along the line of what the Fed has been doing based on inflation alone. Of course, that's not the only reason that makes the Fed change interest rates, but it's a pretty close proxy to what the Fed will be doing. Just a whole host of economic indicators here. I would probably have you look at one I think is kind of important from a historical perspective is looking at the Fed recession probability model here. Those gray bars represent periods of recession, and then you can see what the Fed did in response to that. And I think that's, kind of like, where's the next gray bar? Is it over here? Is it further out? I think that's the whole discussion that we're in, based on things have been too good for too long, maybe. The economy has been kind of moving along in a positive fashion since, 2008 or so. We've recovered. At some point, the business cycle is just going to have to turn. It's just the way the economy works. And the big question is when. One little bit concerning, as I said in the very beginning, is this whole manufacturing as it's been has been declining. We've had a pretty good run in manufacturing. Manufacturing historically over the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years has not been a great producer for United States, since many, as you know, a lot of our manufacturing jobs, of course, went overseas. But this past year or two, we've done pretty well, and it's been recovering, but we are seeing it declining, and that's usually a leading economic indicator when purchasing managers are not buying as much. So when you look at purchasing managers from a corporate standpoint, what are they putting in their inventories for production? And as those purchasing managers start to buy less, that is a good leading economic indicator saying to us that there is a potential for a slowdown here when purchasing managers decide to slow down their inventory purchase for whatever they have to have online. We could probably spend the next day or so talking about all of this. This is a tough topic to talk about, but you can kind of see what's happening here. There's a number of places where we're having imports from, and you can see the decline in China by about 12% or so. This is a story to watch. I think this is probably one of the biggest economic movers right now and drivers of our economy, and what is happening, whether it's in the equity market or the fixed income market, is definitely going to have an impact, both on monetary and fiscal policy, and basically also what, from a political standpoint, the United States has to do to keep the economy going. So
those are our biggest trade partners where the decline's taking place?
Yes.
Well, the biggest are Mexico and Canada.
Yeah. But those are some big ones that have a negative.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I don't see Canada's listed there.
Yeah, right there. It's got a
Third from the
negative
bottom.
1/3 from the bottom, right here. Germany, of course, is really the stronghold for Europe, and it's the EU. I think we've talked about this in the past years. When Ben Bernanke was doing all the purchases of long-term mortgages and treasuries to provide liquidity in the marketplace, the EU did not do anything like that until recently, in the last couple of years. So their recovery did not come as soon as strong as we did. So I think historically some of those fiscal moves that were made by the Federal Reserve probably is going to be proven to be some pretty good moves. Agriculture, of course, is another big area of a battle here. You can see that, the value of the China agriculture products imports from U.S. So this is all the heavy discussions that have been taking place as a result of that. When you look at GDP expectations for October 2019 versus June of 2019, you can see some changes here. We were looking at potentially the world down by 2.7 back in June of 2019. Now it's growing to 3.4, but U.S. is expected to still be a little bit higher. So you can see how the numbers have correlated a little bit, but generally the trend is down as opposed to up. And of course, these are all, predictions.
What's the difference there for the U.S. Going up since June?
I think that is because the economy overall, despite some of the weaknesses we've had, have improved, and with the Fed cutting interest rates, that's providing additional liquidity in the marketplace. So it's obviously it's making money a little bit cheaper. That's the whole reason the Fed cuts
Doesn't
rates.
look like a recession then.
Yeah. All right, so this is the famous dot plot. This report actually comes from the Federal Reserve Open Market Committee. And again, as we talked about in previous meeting, each dot represents a board member's thought about where their individual thought is on future interest rates. And you can see that the Fed futures, which is a market that's traded, how that curve is much lower. But overall, rates, as you can see, if we had this chart, maybe a year ago, we were expecting, somewhere around maybe around 3% in 2020. If we went back a couple years, and that has shifted all down. So we see a lot lower interest rates, and then even long-term interest rates at about, I would say the average here, maybe call it 2.5 or so. Where long-term interest rates just a year ago was expected to be somewhere around over 3. So generally speaking, I think it's fair to say the Fed thinks rates are going to be lower. You can see that they have already cut interest rates twice. Maybe there's one more this year, but certainly we're not going to see the Fed raising rates anytime soon this year or even next year.
Steve, does that chart try to read the mind of the individual members of the board?
Actually, those dots are the minds of those individuals.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you notice that for the longer term, it's in the shape of a Christmas tree? I'm sorry, I didn't point that out.
A Christmas tree? There's your Christmas tree.
There's a lot of division among the Fed members, so it's interesting.
Yeah, so as with any board, there's always a group of that stick together, and there's always a few or two up and down. It's just natural.
It's quite sharply divided, actually.
Yeah, it's very divided.
It's very divided, yeah. In fact, what's interesting, and I wish I could put this like in a little video so you could see each of these just move in time, if we could do that, and you would see that generally speaking, the last couple of years, the board has been probably a little bit closer together, and there'd be like one person way up, one person way down. But you guys made a really good observation. It's getting more bifurcated here between a group saying a little bit higher and a group saying a little bit lower than in past years. But it would be interesting to sort of do a time motion chart to see how that all would translate. But overall, it's fair to say that all board members expect lower interest rates. It's just a relativity between the differences of each board member. But overall, rates are lower expectation for the future than it was a year ago for the future. And that will be reflected in the yield curve. When we look at the market expects additional rate cuts, you can see here the Fed futures as of September 30th do expect rates to continue to drop. And if you look at Fed funds future of 2018, and then of course March of 2019, and look where we are in September, how much difference the Fed futures from, basically 2.5 to right over 1%. And that's what affects this yield curve. So this is the Treasury yield curve out from 3 months to 30 years. The December 31st is in this dotted orange. And then June 30th is here in this dotted blue. And then September 30th is in a solid line. And you can see this inversion where, you can kind of see that the 2-year breaks here with anything less than 2 year is higher. Generally speaking, that is a slightly, indication that a recession is coming. The Fed is cutting rates, but the market's already ahead of all that by having lower expectation for interest rates. The other thing that's kind of affecting this is that there is a strong demand for treasuries. So you've got a lot of long-term investors buying treasuries. Obviously, the more demand you have for treasuries, the higher the price, the lower the yield. And that is another pressure on our treasury. I don't have a chart today, but if you look at a lot of these sovereign bonds from other countries, I think there's like 22 countries, they were in negative territory. So if you're a long-term investor and you need to buy high-rated fixed rate bonds, you're going to go to U.S. Treasuries. That's the place to be is United States.
Do the negative interest countries have the same general shape?
Well, they're in the zeros.
The zeros?
Yeah,
Is
and
it
they have
up or
pretty much
kind of flat?
zero flat curve, right? So if you're negative, that means that if you buy $1 million treasury, you're going to pay for that treasury to come back, or that sovereign debt to come back to you, and you're
Pay more than 100%.
You're paying more than 100%.
Right.
So whatever interest, you're not going to earn any interest. You're going to pay the interest to have that principal come
Well, I
back to you.
understand, but I don't understand.
Yeah,
But still, the curve, the so-called curve is nearly flat for them.
nearly flat and below zero. So it's
Sound like the way I feel.
it's like a
about it.
really bad EKG.
Something with your money.
There's no heartbeat at all.
Aren't you better putting it in your own bank or just
So
putting it aside than cash? Aren't you better in cash?
mattress sales pretty hot in Europe.
Yeah, as long as you don't forget you put it in the mattress. That has happened. But looking at our own yields, you can see both the 2-year and 10-year Treasury, as I showed you on that whole complete yield curve. You can see both of them are quite a bit low, and we thought these rates were low. Remember how we were complaining that these rates were low and we were not happy with these rates? Well, I think we're even more unhappy now. As these rates.
Extraordinary, that kind of percentage change in interest rates when they're already so low.
Yes, and also what's also very interesting, people think the fixed income bond market's a boring market compared to the equity market. I'm in both markets with my endowments and foundation clients. But yeah, this is, in a really short period of time, we've seen this happen. This is not over a 3-year period. This is over a very short period of time with a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace that has just, pushed the curve from going up to going down in a very, very quick fashion, relatively speaking, for a fixed income market. Just to kind of give you some idea of what yields look like across the various sectors, from treasuries, agencies being, of course, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, AA corporates, single A corporates, triple B corporates. You'll see the triple B obviously is the place to be from a yield perspective. That's where most of the juice is going to be.
For yield, but how about for safety? Jesus.
Well, yeah, that's a different story. Let's see. We'll skip over that.
So I read that more of the major companies are in triple B now, even triple B minus. But what percentage
You
are
mean
in?
most companies are rated that way?
Yeah.
Or they're buying those? I'm sorry.
The bonds are rated
Well, the biggest category is actually right now single A.
single A.
Yeah, but it's tilting to the triple B, but the vast majority of the well-known names, the household names that you know and are very familiar with, are going to be single A rated. That's pretty much where the market. There's only 4 AAA security firms left. The AA market has shrunk over the last years, and that started after the Great Recession, when both Moody's, S&P, and Fitch redid their matrix, if you will. Their scoring card was changed in reaction to the Great Recession. And it's not so much that the financial profiles of the companies change, it's really the grading, the scores on how companies are graded changed. So good, solid corporations are basically going to be in the single A category. I mean, that's sort of the phrase now. The single A is a triple A. That's just kind of the way it is right now. This kind of gives you an idea of the 6 months commercial paper spread. So if you think of treasuries being 0, commercial paper is about 23 basis points over a 6 months T-bill. And then looking at money market yields, so this is sort of the short-term portfolio. This is kind of where Leanne has most of her activity. So this is a helpful chart to show you. This is commercial paper and treasuries and agency yield curves for over a 12-month period. So you can see commercial paper is quite a bit higher. So that gives you the short-term situation. Fixed income return. These are total returns. Everything at a year and greater are total returns. The other ones are just periodic returns. So you can see that for the last 3 months, the returns have been positive, which is, of course, partly driven by the fact that the Fed cut rates and the yield curve has been declining. So that means total returns are going to increase. And you can see the one-year return for U.S. Treasuries and throughout the sectors and duration. Okay, so let me just flip over to the performance report. Yes. I'm sorry. My apologies.
A second. I know this is a rather esoteric subject, but I've been. A lot of people are obviously concerned about the lack of liquidity in the repo market, and we need to. A lack of liquidity in a market doesn't suggest to me that interest rates are going to go down. I mean, a lack of liquidity usually suggests that interest rates are going up. And while the Fed has said, well, we're not doing quantitative easing, we're doing quantitative easing, and there is I don't know whether it's that there are fewer dealers or fewer dealers are willing to take on as much inventory, but they're obviously having trouble financing the inventory. And to me, I don't know. I'm not versed enough in the subject to know that to be able to deal with it on a professional basis. But I know one thing: it's not a good sign.
No.
And it does suggest to me that we should be very thoughtful and careful, and particularly as to the quality of the stuff that we're buying, because the fact of the matter is that everybody got it wrong. I'm not saying you did. Everybody thought interest rates are going up. They didn't go that way. They went dramatically down. As a matter of fact, the only market that's outperformed. I mean, every market has had a wonderful year this year, but owning U.S. Treasuries it's at least equal to that you could have achieved in the equities market. So I think that we should. I don't know whether this is something all the pundits say. Well, this is for the adults to worry about it, and you children shouldn't be focused on this. To me, I think it's a big problem, and it suggests to me. I mean, your comment was that, well, gosh, the Fed's quantitative easing program was more successful than the Europeans was. I think sooner or later there's going to be a price. We all know there's a price to be paid
Absolutely.
for enjoying the candy today,
Absolutely. Yep.
so forth. But I think the repo thing is a substantive issue that should be borne in mind. And I'm not. I can't explain it properly or anything and I'm certainly not an expert on the subject, but I know one thing, that it's not a good thing if the market for U.S. government securities is or overnight loans against government securities are highly illiquid, and the Federal Reserve has to step in and address the matter. So
There aren't enough U.S. government securities for overnight purchases, is what you're saying.
No, there's not enough. There are not enough people willing to provide short-term overnight financing
Right.
to carry the inventory. So there is, for lack of a better term, there's too much inventory.
Oh, okay.
I mean, so in a sense, there's
many
there's
US
too
government
many.
securities.
There are too many securities, or at least there are not enough going away buyers. Let's put it that way. So it's a highly technical subject, and I'd certainly.
Well, and that's why you saw repo rates just go out of the roof.
Does a deficit create
Well,
that?
I mean, they say, well, as a result of the what was the statute that was passed after the Great Recession to change restrict banks' investment and their
Dodd-Frank.
yes, right. Thank you. And as a consequence, they have to keep more reserves on balance.
More reserves.
On reserves.
And also,
at the Fed.
the reserves have to be a higher credit quality.
Yes, that's right. So, but for whatever reason, the dealers, who are now, majority of them are non-U.S. financial institutions, which I don't know whether that is true in the aggregate of positions, but it's certainly true that there are many more non-U.S.
That's true.
dealers than there are U.S. dealers.
That's true.
And somebody doesn't want to own these things permanently, or they haven't found somebody to buy them, and they have to finance their inventories. And of course, they're suggesting. I mean, every day they seem to announce, well, gosh, the repo facility at the Fed is going to be increased. This is not good news.
No, it's not.
No,
No,
and I
it's
think
a
we
structural situation.
Yeah, and maybe it is structural, and you can fix it by changing the law and all the rest of it. But somehow it doesn't. It's not a heartwarming set of.
Then you think it's the reserve requirements for the big
Well,
banks?
that's a suggestion.
That's part of it, yeah. I think it's, a multifaceted situation that, one, like you said, there's too many dealers.
Well, there is. People are unwilling to. They are not willing to carry. There's more inventory available for sale, or at least than there is. There are ready buyers. So it's not as if there are shortage of securities. There
Exactly, yeah.
are more. This impacts us because it really impacts short term, the very short end of the curve. So, anyway.
I was hoping the guru would speak on this subject, and you have.
Well, I know you're telling me to shut up.
I know, I'm not at all. I was looking for it.
So, I mean, the flip side of all this is that for money market funds, which utilize a lot of repurchase agreements as part of their money market funds, they saw a spike in yields because their allocations or repurchase agreements, the yields went up. So the money market fund and LGIPs that use repos saw a nice spike up in yield because of that. But even though that's a nice benefit, it's a situation that it's like kind of a red flag. Whenever yields in a certain sector is beyond everything else and beyond sort of its normal range, it's concerning. It's the same it's kind of not the same situation, but it's the same kind of red flag when we had a couple dealers in 2008. For instance, Bear Stearns is a good one, where they had to pay a tremendous amount of higher yields on their repurchase agreements to fund themselves because they were hemorrhaging. So their overnight repo rates to investors was way beyond the rest of the market. And that was a red flag that when there is an outlier out there, there's usually something concerning about that because it is a mechanism for liquidity. And so when that comes out of range, it's a good, like you're saying, it's a good thing to look at and be concerned about it.
Yeah.
What's the upshot of that? What is the upshot?
The really
Other than saying
crisis
it's a
moment
problem.
in the 2008 was the inability of the dealers
to
to
borrow
finance
free.
themselves.
Exactly.
At any
Overnight
price.
financing.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's always the same. It's always the same old story. You
Yeah,
know,
right.
it's a liquidity issue.
It's
and
a liquidity
a
issue.
lack of liquidity is a very negative sign.
We used to say that you could always get money at some interest rate, but the
Well,
answer
yeah,
was
you
no.
can. Yes.
Can
yeah,
you?
Yeah. Well, you can.
Sounds
but
like you can't.
Now you can get it from the Fed.
Yeah.
So, but they're creating it. I mean, it's not. There's no real. It suggests that there's no real. That there's a delinquency in the market for people who really want to buy and own these things. Anyway, it's a matter that I'm sure you all pay attention to, and I just thought it would be worth at least mentioning.
It goes right back to the point about, we're going to be getting all our tax revenue will be coming in late November, early December, and I've already had preliminary discussions with PFM about the timing. I'm still waiting for dates from the tax collectors when we're expecting the money, and I never know how much we're going to get on a given day, but coming up with a plan on how we're going to invest the money this year and how we're going to do it. How much is going into pools, how much we're investing in individual securities, the option of going and investing, doing money markets at banks. They're always knocking on the door. We've not done that before. So we're trying to look at all the pieces, and the comment about making sure we have really high quality items, securities in the portfolio is very well taken. So it's something we're working on right now.
Over year end, I would say.
Right. Well, and that's about the time we'll be investing. It's always tricky. When we get ready to invest in December, I'm on the phone with the desk at PFM, and we're trying to find securities. And not a lot of people are issuing paper at that time.
Right.
So it's always a challenge trying to find that. So our plan so far, and we're still at the very beginning, I want to try to get the money invested as quickly as we can. So the day tax revenue comes in, I want to be queued up with a plan. I don't want to be at the very end of the year trying to do it. But we'll probably be bringing back more information to you at the December 6th meeting to show you what we've invested so far. Most of the money comes in after our meeting on December 6th. It will be coming in middle of December. So we'll hopefully have an idea of what we're going to do. But at the end of the day, we'll have a plan, and it will depend on what's available in the market.
Well, if you're a lender, as we are, as we would be, will be in that, it's all to use.
Right.
As Steve points out, all to the good. But on the other hand, the quality of the stuff you buy
It's important.
is important.
Well, we'll also in December be talking about borrowing. We're going to do a COPS issue, so we'll be we'll be lending and borrowing both sides of it.
Right.
All right, I just hit a few more points on this is the long-term portfolio. So as I think Leanne, you're going to talk about the short-term, right? So Leanne's going to talk about the short-term stuff. So this is the long-term portfolio, maybe for your reference. So we've carved out assets of the school district that can be invested out a little bit longer. But I'll caution you, don't get spooked when I say long-term. We're only really talking about
1.5 years.
1.74 years. So it's not like long term. Yeah. So it's all relevant. So this represents about $43 million. I think we're still looking to add more money.
We're going to be adding some money. When the tax revenues come in, part of what we'll do is set aside some of that and put it into the core. We need to increase it now.
Exactly. So this is the core cash. You'll notice that this was as of September 30th, so the current market yield was 181 on September 30th. The yield on cost, which is really the income number that's being produced off the portfolio, is at 237. Bless you. So this will give you this will tell you right away that interest rates have been declining, right? So if the yield at market on September 30th was 181 and the yield of cost on the portfolio is 237, that tells you right away that interest rates have been dropping, which is going to improve the market values, the appreciation of the portfolio because of that difference there. The average credit quality, speaking to the credit quality on an S&P basis, it's a AA. Keep in mind that S&P, downgraded U.S. Treasury agencies down from a AAA to AA plus. So this portfolio is based on S&P. From highly liquid securities, is about 58% in Treasuries in this portfolio. So that has lots of liquidity. The rest is in 35% in corporates, and then a little bit of in agencies. There isn't a whole lot of spread differential between agencies and treasuries, so we always just go ahead and prefer to buy treasuries just because the situation with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is there's virtually little difference between U.S. Treasuries and those two agencies.
What's the non-ratings?
That's we have a municipal bond from Hawaii in there, so the S&P doesn't have a rating for it, but it has high ratings from Moody's and Fitch.
I see.
Yeah, we can only show one credit rating on this report. Yeah. From the performance standpoint, you'll notice that the quarter we're about 68. We're behind the benchmark for the last year, about 21 basis points, and that's because of the decline in interest rates that happened to the portfolio. We were, of course, a little bit shorter. We're at 174. The benchmark was 181. So longer durations did better when interest rates declined. We were being defensive for rising interest rates, and so that difference from a return perspective made us go a little bit less than the benchmark because we were really with the expectation of rising interest rates, and then of course the Fed changed, and we could not change the portfolio that quickly because of the potential realized losses we would take on the portfolio.
Problems with predicting.
Problems with predicting, yes. But long-term results are quite positive against the benchmark. You can see that the 3-year, 5-year, and 10-year, and since inception are all 20-some basis points above the benchmark. I suspect that as we move into the rest of this year, you'll see that spread differential getting smaller and smaller from an annual basis. You can see that we are ahead of the benchmark already by 10 basis points for this quarter. I suspect that we'll be somewhere in that range again this next quarter. So over the next couple of quarters, you'll see the return will outdo the benchmark as we move through this next couple of quarters. But we're already right-sizing it in this past quarter. Just from a numbers perspective, to kind of give you some idea of what does it mean from an income perspective. So interest earnings for the quarter for this piece of the portfolio was about $221,000. We had a market value gain of $70,000, so that gives us a total portfolio earnings of almost $300,000. So that $70,000 represents the decline in interest rates, the increase in the value of bonds over the quarter. So that's a plus 70. And then, of course, the interest income, which is based on that yield to cost that I showed you, that's what's driving that 221, and then the two together gives you the portfolio earnings for the quarter. This just shows you, it represents the change in the portfolio sector allocation from December of 2018 to September of 2019. You'll see that we've added more treasuries in the portfolio over time here as we've reduced the amount of agencies. So you see this blue has been dropping, as you can see from year to year, and that's because of the spread compression between the two, so we just buy treasuries instead. So as I had said a couple years ago when we talked about the situation with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, we kind of talked about that the portfolios of this nature will be comprised of two major sectors, that's treasuries and corporates, as the agency market has declined, and that's when we had that discussion about using supernationals to help replace federal agencies as those spreads have just been compressing as federal agencies are fewer in supply than they have historically been.
Is that a good thing to do, the supernationals over the federal agencies?
We thought they were, yes. Credit quality, this is a good chart given our discussion right here. You'll see that 67% of the portfolio is in the AA plus under S&P. If this was under a Moody's credit rating, it would be AAA rated would be 67 as opposed to AA plus. So I'll leave it on there. If anybody has any questions on the market update and the long-term portion of the portfolio.
Well, just for nothing more than curiosity, why do we own any munis?
The taxable munis will be, you know,
Oh, these are,
pretty good, yeah.
okay, these are, okay, I'm sorry.
It's a, like you said, very, you know, it's very few.
Okay, and why, and the triple B plus, what on that, what would that be?
So there's a corporate bond, I forget which one it is, has a split rating, and on the S&P it's AAA, it's a triple B plus, and then on the S&P it's an A. So some of these corporates will have split ratings.
Yes, I understand.
We take the S&P rating, right?
We take the highest of the ratings.
Okay, I'm going to switch over to the district quarterly investment report, which is looking at the portion that PFM manages, that core portfolio, as well as the short term they're managing, and then all the bank accounts, the pools, everything else. This is the total investment portfolio. So the total portfolio right now, we are getting close to, this is as of September 30th, we're getting close to the low point in cash. The lowest day is probably around November 22nd. It's the day before tax revenues come in. That day is important because that's what we key the TAN issuance off of. So we're looking at the lowest point in the general fund to figure out how much to borrow. So I know that date. But there's about $660 million as of September 30th. And then this just shows the composition. 45% in trust securities, 41% in money markets or pools, 14% bank balances. That's significantly different than what you saw last year because as we've talked about, we're trying to invest more, and we have that very colorful chart I'll show you on the next couple pages that shows the difference of how we're trying to be more active in managing the cash and not leave as much money in the bank. But we are going to look at what those interest rates are. So as we move along, I want to get to where you can see the returns down here. So the core portfolio, Steve's already talked about. Property tax collections, we haven't received any yet. Sales tax collections are at $359.5 million, still at 114% of our overall projections. So we've collected 26% of the sales tax to date. The sales tax report is still in the back. I just wanted to bring that latest information out on this cover page. Interest revenues net of fees total $5.9 million right now. And let's see. Oops, too far. What we've added on to the report, we're trying to compile a yield on the short-term portfolio. And we showed this for the first time at the last meeting. We used to just show what the benchmark was and show you all the rates. So we've been spending a lot of time trying to manipulate the software that we use to track investments to be able to come up with a yield. And actually PFM is offered to do this as well. So we're going to be doing it, I think, and Steve and I have a meeting after this meeting today to go over several things. But one of the things we're looking at doing is handing them all the information on the short-term portfolio, letting them do the calculations so we have a way to double-check what's in Simpro. So I don't want to stop doing the calculations we're doing. There's a value to that. It's a way for us to double-check that what they're doing is right. But at the same time, they can double-check that what we're doing is right. So right now, there's information in this report that's not contained in the PFM report, and I think you're going to start seeing where we're really duplicating a lot. Their presentation is going to have a lot more detail, a lot more color than ours does, because they have more technology than we do. But we're going to start tracking it and try to give you some more information and let them double-check our data as well. So this is just a chart. Last time we showed you this, it was just general fund. And I did that because I wanted to do apples-to-apples comparison. When you start adding in the sales tax, and we go back to 2017, our total amount of money invested has gone up because of the sales tax. Well, starting with this year, general fund is not going to be apples-to-apples comparison either because of the referendum that was passed, and we're going to be receiving an extra $175 million this year on the general fund because of what the taxpayers approved. So there's not a good apples to apples. So it's just going to be, this is the interest income, this is the interest earnings. So this committee is looking at overall what the interest earnings are, what we're investing in. There's a lot of reasons why these probably aren't valid comparisons. This is just data. I mean, the amount of money we're investing is changing. the interest rates have changed significantly. What we're investing in has changed significantly. So I don't know that there is a way to do a good apples-to-apples comparison unless we're just comparing to how we do versus the benchmark. But I still think it's interesting data to have. As interest rates rise and our amount of money we're investing goes up, the amount of interest earnings goes up as well. So we'll continue to show that, and we'll continue to tweak this report. It's just trying to make sure that the committee has information to look at. And if there's ever anything else you want to see on this type of information, please let me know, because this is something we can modify and change as we need to. This is just showing the total portfolio and how the money's diversified and what it's invested in. So this shows how the money is spread across years, and of course a lot of it is overnight this time of year. Our short-term portfolio is almost all matured. The last of it matured in October, earlier this month. It's okay. But as of September, we still had some money here. This was a short-term portfolio at 0 to 6 months. The rest of it's in cash and pools, and of course this is breaking it out across all funds. So we show the amount of money that's in the bank. In Wells Fargo is $192 million. And $29 million is the school internal accounts. We're tracking that as well. And then this is money at Bank of New York for debt service payments. The only money that's there right now, the very small amounts, is interest earnings from the day we send it up in June until they make the debt service payments on August 1st. It earns some money, so that interest sits there. The rest of it is related to the QZABs, which we did back in 2004 and 5. Those are set up, we make annual payments to them. They sit in an escrow account, and they'll all mature. One matures later this year in December, and the next one matures in 2020. So that money is sitting there ready to pay those off. So typically, if we didn't have the QZABs, there'd be very little money sitting in Bank of New York right now. But this is the escrows for the QZABs.
It's the money we get at 0 interest rate.
Yeah. Pretty much.
In Europe, that wouldn't be a very good deal.
You gotta
No.
pay more.
Okay, and this is just showing the interest allocation across all the portfolios. So I'm looking at it this way to see everything and where all the money's at. So there's invested bank balances, and we aren't earning money, an interest rate on the bank, and you saw that on the first page. The rates is based on Fed funds. So it's a decent rate. It's not as good as we could get somewhere else in a lot of cases.
Are those secured?
Yes, they're all collateralized with the state of Florida. And then we have the pools, and then it's spread across. And again, most some year there's not a whole lot in securities. It's really the core portfolio and a little bit in the short-term portfolio. At this point, the short-term portfolio is all in cash and pools. That'll change significantly. And this is the colorful chart. This is a working document, and I really liked. At some point, probably for the next meeting, I'll drop off last July, and we'll get to where we're looking at just fiscal year, because it gets too busy when you look at it this way. But it does show last year, the white line is the expected 2 weeks worth of expenditures, and that's my goal of what I want to keep in the bank. So that's covering the next payroll. I don't want to invest the next payroll in case something crazy happens. I want to have that much that's liquid and easy to get to. So the goal is 2 weeks. Eventually I may shrink this down, but right now it's 2 weeks. And that's what's in the different shades of green is money in the bank. So if you look at last year, we had a lot more money in the bank. And so we've made a conscious effort in trying to change this to where the amount of money in the bank is matching that 2 weeks worth of investment. The spikes are going to happen every year. I haven't figured out how to make them go away. This is when we put the money at, we get ready to make the debts. We make the debt service payments in June. We're wiring out about $100 million to Bank of New York for debt service in June. And then September is when we pay off the TAN. It's $100 million comes in the bank, and then we have to wire it out. It actually is only there for a few days, but this is doing a 2-week average. So it's a spike that's there that we work around. So there was a lot more cash last year. This year we're managing it much more tightly. And this is where we're at right now. I mean, this was as of September 30th, but we really haven't changed anything. We have this little spike of extra cash that I could invest, but I'm maxed out on the pools. I can't do any more in pools. And I would need to have the cash back in less than 30 days. there's not a good security that I can go buy for 30 days. So the best place for me to keep it is at the bank. So one of the things that I'm talking with Steve about is looking at some other bank money market funds, the ones that are fully collateralized with the state, that are in really good financial shape, and they're always calling, we can invest the money for you and give you this return. So that may be another tool in the toolbox to use in instances like this when we've maxed out on the pools and it's a short-term window. It doesn't make sense to go buy a 30-day treasury because the rate would be really, really low. So, but we're going to update this and start doing it with projections for this coming tax cycle. So when you see it next time, we'll probably start in July, and we'll switch it to another fiscal year. But there was a big difference in how we managed cash this year versus last, or how we're managing it now. Let's see. Okay, this just lists all the securities and it lists all of them broken out by fund. So this is the Treasury Pool. So this is the core portfolio. This is what Steve's already gone through. Had a lot of different things in it, and then we're going to get down to short-term portfolio. Let's see if I can find a better way to move this down. Okay, so this is what's in the Bank of New York. This is, again, mostly related to the QZABs. This is the investments that are actually managed by, one is Wells Fargo, one is Bank of America. They get to choose how the investments in those escrows are invested. Going too far. Here's the short term. And this is including the bank balances. There's some commercial paper here and some treasuries, and they have matured, and they're no longer here. You see, they matured October 1st and October 3rd. So these have actually gone at this point. So what's left are pools and bank balances. And then the next thing is the sales tax report, which we have a sales tax committee meeting coming up on November 8th. So you'll get probably 1 month ahead of this. I'll be updating this again to show the money that came in at the end of September. There we go. So again, it's coming in at 114% of projections. Expenditures to date, $169 million, and $129 million in purchase orders. But what I wanted to make sure I pointed out, we do have that line of credit in place now. So I can't believe I'm saying this. I like his iPad for showing this report. It makes it easier to move things around. I'm a big Android fan. We fight about this all the time. So you'll see we had fees associated with the line of credit now. We hadn't seen that before. Part of that was due to the initial cost of issuance, paying the attorneys and the advisors, and that was all expected. The fees, because we haven't drawn down the line of credit, it's that unused fee, which is 0.1%. Is the interest rate on it. So I expect that those fees are going to stay very, very low in comparison to the interest earnings. We've had $6 million in interest earnings, $150,000 of fees. The expected fees associated with the line of credit are under $1 million. So I don't think we're ever going to completely tap into this. I want to make sure those interest earnings are set aside for the sales tax in case we ever get to the point where we really do need to draw on the line of credit. If it's just unused fees, I know we've got it covered. But if we ever get to the point where we need to draw down cash to expedite projects, then we would dip more into those interest revenues.
This line of credit was entered so that you'd have the ability to contract.
Right.
Correct?
Right.
So you have available money if you need it.
Right. I don't, when we do the projections and based on the cash flows that I've developed, I don't think we will ever need to draw on the line of credit unless something significant changes with facilities and the track of their projects and how fast they go. I don't think we'll ever need to draw on it, but in order to issue purchase orders and contracts, we had to have the money either in hand or available overnight. So that line of credit allows us to draw on it. At this point, I'm expecting to, at some point this year, probably around February is what I'm planning, we'll increase the amount of a line of credit up to $130 million. Again, that's just to allow for contracts. So we'd increase the amount that's authorized. And we're trying to manage that as well. We're going to increase it, adjust it once a year based on the budget. If we ever actually draw on it, I'll certainly be talking with you all and talk with the sales tax committee as well. Something significant would have to change for us to be drawing on it, unless something, they'd have to be speeding up projects significantly. And we are running into the same thing Steve mentioned about the fact there's so much construction in the state, trying to find contractors to do the work. They're putting projects out, and sometimes we get bids and sometimes we don't. Or sometimes the bids come in 3 and 4 times what we expect, and the contractors are saying, we're just putting a price in because we don't want to not respond, but we really don't have workers to do the work right now, so then we postpone projects. So if we can't get the work done, I don't see why we need to actually borrow cash. So I don't, this line of credit is there just so we can issue purchase orders, and I'll adjust the amount annually based on the amount of contracts they're issuing. So that really covers all the investment information. Do y'all have any questions?
Fantastic report.
What I'd like to do, we were going to do the TANs and sales tax, the TANs and the line of credit. Mr. Harris has been waiting, so I want to go ahead and let him talk about Sunshine, and we'll take that out of order so that he doesn't have to wait too much longer, if that's okay with the committee.
Bruce Harris?
Mr. Harris, do you want to run the computer? Go right ahead, and I'll just tell me when to change slides for you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Those of you who don't know me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Bruce Harris. I'm one of the attorneys in the Office of General Counsel. I had sent out through email a request to the committee, board advisory committee liaisons, offering to make this presentation if they wanted it, and Leanne did ask if I would come and speak for reminders about Sunshine and some other voting issues that you're subject to.
Yeah, and Bruce, just so you know, I don't think this group has ever heard about the lobbyist policy. I think that came into place since you did the last presentation to them, so I think that's new. The Sunshine's definitely a reminder.
Okay.
Okay.
There was an email that was supposed to go out to them about the lobbyist policy. I don't know if it went, but there was one that was,
Okay.
had been prepared.
Right.
Okay. Sunshine, Florida has open government laws. And the main thing about Sunshine is for those people who are members of the committee, either voting or non-voting, you're not allowed to speak to each other about matters that reasonably may come before the committee for discussion or vote. That's the bottom line of it. If you go to the next slide. This applies to meetings, and like here, we're in the Sunshine, but if 2 of you got together, you know, that would be considered a meeting. You're not allowed to have that involving, you know, whether formal or informal. It has to be open. And there was an Attorney General opinion, and it also applies to non-voting members. So I was asked a question because I've given this presentation before. Does this mean I can't speak to my board member? No, that doesn't mean that. You are allowed to speak to your board member. You can speak to other board members, but you can't use them as a liaison to find out what other committees members are talking about, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Okay, why is Sunshine Law important? One, if it's violated, someone could challenge the action, the committee action would be voided. But 2, there could be fines, and if you're knowingly violating it, there could even be criminal penalties. So it's important to comply with the Sunshine Law. Next. It's not just verbal communications, we're also talking about written communications with another committee member. That could include emails. So, you know, we advise liaisons if they're communicating about an issue with committee members to BCC so that somebody doesn't respond back and, you know, you have a communication there. And text messaging is another issue. Now, anything that's written, of course, would be public record, including emails, including text messages, if they're dealing with business of the district or the committee. So, but the bottom line is those type of communications are also covered where you can't communicate with each other relating to business. Open meeting, just because it's non-substantive
doesn't mean it's not subject to sunshine. And also, other types of communications, telephone, use of computer, social media. If any of you have Facebook or other types of, social media accounts, you can't be communicating with each other through those accounts. Now, there is exception. For instance, you go to a private forum sponsored by a private organization, and you're allowed to be there as long as you don't discuss it. There could be more than one of you at that function or social functions, but you can't be discussing or debating issues among yourselves relating to this committee. Next. So, as I stated, socially you're not prohibited from attending the same function, but don't discuss issues relating to the committee. Now, I mentioned before about conduits and liaisons. You can't go talking to a non-member and, for instance, try to find out what a member is thinking and then, communicate that back. That's being a liaison. That's not allowed under the Sunshine Law. They also say that committee meetings shouldn't be at luncheons because it may discourage people from attending. And these are public meetings. You're supposed to have public comment on your agenda. People in the public are allowed to speak before you actually have a vote on an issue so that they can have comment on that. That was actually put in the statute. And another thing is, you're sitting next to someone at a meeting and you want to tell the person your thoughts about what you're hearing. Those are inaudible discussions and people in the public can't hear that. So that's another issue to avoid.
We can talk to you, you as the lawyer for the group.
Yes.
Can't we talk to you individually?
Yes. We're not members. We're not members of the
Don't
committee.
you sometimes talk to the individual members?
Me
Individually?
personally,
Well, somebody, not just.
I really don't.
Well, but somebody could.
They could.
Individually.
Yes.
Yeah, you all can talk to me, and all of you do, and I communicate. When I send emails, I always blind copy you, and you all respond back to me, and we talk, but I'm not getting information from Rick and passing it on to George, and this is what they said, and this is how you should vote. We don't do that.
That's correct. That's
Right.
correct.
But you can
Right.
find out the sense of people.
I could be talking to people, certainly, and I may know what a lot of people think and bring it into the committee, but I'm not airing that in front of the committee. I'm not collecting all the data on what I think Ebony's going to do and bring it back to the committee.
You can have knowledge, basically.
Absolutely. I'm the liaison. We changed
She's
the
she's
language.
the staff liaison
Right.
for the committee.
Yeah, we changed that language because we used to be called ex officio members, and ex officio members were prohibited from doing that. And we used to have a board member that was listed as ex officio, and we've changed that. So now it's listed as a board member and staff I'm the staff liaison. So we specifically changed that so that you all could talk to us, because that's what the committee's for.
And the board member is a liaison also.
Right.
From the board to the committee.
Right.
Okay, about voting. Because things have to be in the open. Oops, no,
I'm
go
going
back. Go back. You can't have a secret vote. If it happens to be a written vote, you got to have names and signatures and so forth on the vote. But you can't have any secret votes. Okay, next one. Another thing about voting is if you have a conflict of interest on a matter, and if you need guidance on that, there's the Florida Commission on Ethics. They have a website, who to contact, and so forth to find out. But if you believe you have a conflict, there's a form you need to fill out, 8B, and you need to, I believe
And
Brenda.
we always have those here. They're on the. Yep, we always bring them.
So, and you're, with that form, you cannot, unless you have that conflict, you cannot abstain. You have to vote on an issue. And if you're going to have a conflict, you have to disclose that conflict before participating in the discussion. Now, technically, under the laws of an advisory committee, you're allowed to discuss it, even if you have the conflict, if you've done the form, but we don't recommend it because there's a perception that it's inappropriate, and you certainly can't vote.
You cannot vote? Aren't you supposed to disclose your conflict?
Yes, but then you can't
Cannot
vote.
vote.
That's the time when you can't vote. Otherwise, you have to vote, you can't abstain. But if you have a conflict of interest, you're not allowed to vote on that particular
You
issue.
have to announce the conflict.
Yes. Okay, next. Next. Okay. Code of ethics does apply to you. Certain issues such as you can't say to someone or someone approaches you, if you vote this way on an item, I'll give you this, a quid pro quo. You know, that's the type of thing that's not, well, that happens.
It does.
Believe it or not.
It does.
I'm not saying it's ever happened in this district, but I'm saying it can happen. Those are the type of things, misuse of office. You know, there are various, you've seen the ethics training because we had someone come, actually Chris Anderson, he was an attorney, then became general counsel for the Ethics Commission. That training you've all seen. He's also now the director, so he's holding two positions, director and general counsel. Executive director of the commission. So, you know, there is a training, and the Commission on Ethics has a lot of materials as well on its website. And by the way, a lot of these items are in the memo that you've probably received relating to this, but this is a summary of it. Next slide. Mentioned about public records, documents that you have relating to the committee, the official business, are considered public record if they're used to perpetuate, communicate, or formalize knowledge. And there's a retention schedule on how long they need to be kept. Okay, next. December 7th, 2016, the school board adopted a lobbyist registration policy, which applies to advisory committee members. What it says is it talks about lobbying. And by the way, there's going to be a policy going before the school board very soon, which indicates that this policy is supposed to be provided to you. The last time the policy was revised, the policy didn't exist, but we do say currently that you're supposed to see the policy on board committees themselves, 109, your policy. Well, this is another one that you're supposed to receive because you need to know what lobbying is. And it's when there's direct or indirect oral communications on behalf of a client where the person's being paid as a lobbyist. And these are the reasons that are determined to be lobbying. For instance, to assist the client to get district business, to vote a certain way on an action or a policy, to get goodwill of the district. Those are examples under the policy. And the policy also has a long list of what is not considered lobbying, such as showing up at a board meeting and making an argument to the board. And I was asked by one committee about this. Well, we're actually appointed by groups and we're paid. Does that constitute lobbying? The policy specifically says no, because they're members of the committee and they're supposed to be people from that organization on the committee. Okay, so your responsibility is to make every effort to determine if an individual talking to you about a matter is registered, if they're a lobbyist and if they're registered. And you can't knowingly permit a person who is a lobbyist who is not registered to engage in lobbying activity. And then if you've been lobbied, you've got to disclose it before you vote. Next.
Does that ever happen? People disclose that lobbying?
Yes. Yes, I've seen it.
Probably
Been
very
disclosed. It's allowed. Yes.
I was just saying that it's one of the pieces that was very confusing to me coming onto the board. I'm accustomed to sunshine just in a school center with school advisory committees. If you're a member of a school advisory council, you can't talk with other council members about how you're going to vote. So I get that. But for me, I'm just going to use a real example. I think we call them consultants for our associations, for administrators. They're paid by the association, but they're not lobbyists. But we're always a little confused, for example, when it comes to a compensation, a pay issue. Well, they're not lobbyists, but yeah, they've called each of us individually to advocate for their particular group to get a raise or something. It's a very confusing issue. So I pay very close attention to this, and sometimes I'm still confused, so I err on the side of conservative.
Can we, though,
Does that make
confer
sense?
with the lawyer, can we confer with you, Bruce?
Yeah.
or-
On the policy? Yeah,
the policy.
through the liaison, you're more than welcome to confer with us.
Yeah, just call me and let me know, and I can connect you with Bruce.
Okay, and I have seen disclosures before, because it's not prohibited unless the person didn't register. But if they're an actual lobbyist and they did register, you're allowed to discuss it with them, but you got to disclose it. And this was something that the board adopted in 2016 that had not been there before. Okay, so actually, I'm still on the previous
Okay.
slide.
I got
If
it
you
headed.
believe someone's attempting to lobby you and you don't know if they're a lobbyist, you can also contact Leanne and she can try to find out for you. But remember, and the next slide, even if the person is a lobbyist, you're not obligated to be lobbied. You can say you don't want to talk about it. You have no obligation. Any questions? Well, thank you very much, and have a nice rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Bruce. And all the policies, we have links on those on the website, the committee website, so there's places to get them. If you have questions and want copies of them, just let me know. I'll be happy to send you whatever you need.
Okay. So
Okay.
we have what, next?
The next thing, we still need to do the TANs. I'm going to go through these. The results of the lease and the TAN. This is really quick. I just wanted to explain what we did. So the equipment lease that you approved at your August meeting, we completed that. It's being used to finance chillers at 24 schools. We completed it on September 6th.
Yeah.
We actually got documents signed early because the storm was coming and we wanted to make sure that got done. Net interest cost of 1.719, so it's a 5-year loan at 1.7%. We were all happy with the results. So that's all done, and I think the next chart just shows, and I know this is a little on the small side, this shows the existing, I made it smaller, a bit bigger. This is all the existing leases that are out there, and we've paid off the first one. And so we have a few more that come up in 2020, 2021, and 23 and 24. So we've been paying these things down. They're over 5 years. They're not really long-term. So it's just a way to facilitate doing things. We were doing buses originally. With the sales tax, it's paying for school buses, so we don't need to do it there, but we are using it for chillers. We're replacing a lot of air conditioners at a lot of schools, so this has been a good financing tool for that. The tax anticipation note was done. You approved at your April meeting, and we did that in September. That was the day we canceled the meeting because I didn't have much for you to talk about, so we canceled it. But we still had the TAN sale. There were 8 bids that came in. Winning bid came from Bank of America Merrill Lynch with a net interest cost of 1.311%. The note matures on August 28th. And the last page just shows the banks that did bid, so had 8 of them. So that's names that you've heard and seen before.
This covers your so-called deficit.
Right, this is on the general fund.
In what, November, you said?
Right, and there really is, we actually do the math and provide the calculations to a tax specialist council. that looks at it to make sure we're not violating any rules, that we are complying, and we really do have a cash shortfall. General fund typically goes in the red every year, just before tax revenues come in.
You can borrow for that and arbitrage it.
Yes, I can borrow for that and then invest it. And we always, when we get ready to do the TAN this year, we actually show you all the calculation, adjusting the maturity, whether we did a very short period of time or we did through June 30th or through August, to show the math. Because I would love to be able to take the money as quickly as when tax revenues come in, take that money and invest it to maturity, the best possible rate we can get, making sure it's a safe investment, obviously. And then that money will mature just in time to make the debt service payment. And the idea is the interest earnings will offset the interest expense. And we're on target to barely do that.
Italian banks.
Oh yeah, we're not doing Italian banks. So that's really the TANs and the equipment lease. Nothing exciting there, but that was.
They went well.
They did go well. And I think the last thing on the agenda, I'm going back to the agenda. So I think I may have just closed that one. The last thing on the agenda is going to be the election of officers. So this is when I do need to formally take over the meeting. And so we need to ask for a motion, a recommendation for someone to serve, a nomination for somebody to serve as chair.
I'll nominate Rick Miller as chair.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Done.
I nominate Bill McCain.
For vice chair? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Well, I have to vote no, and the guy said I always have to vote.
You can vote no.
I can't vote no? All right.
Okay, so we have our officers for FY 2020. Thank you very much for that. Our next meeting is December 6th. Only have to make sure I've got that right. December 6th. We'll be reviewing the policies and procedures as we always do. I'll be sending those out shortly to all the underwriters and advisors. I always get their feedback to make sure there's nothing out there that I could have missed, and review those. I'm hoping to bring the new money cops issue to you at the December meeting. We need to get that moving. We've actually been waiting on facilities. They've got some questions they need to answer for me. I need to know how much to borrow specifically. So I'm hoping to have that ready for you at the December meeting.
How big do you think that's going to be?
About 140 million.
This is for construction?
It's for construction. This is the first new money cops issue we've done. Really, we did last one was 2007, so it's been over 10 years. We did the Q-Skib in 2010. That was a really different type of thing. So it's new money, but it's really different. But the last time we did a real cops issue was 2007. So it's been a long time. We're going to be having some calls. Bank of America is the lead banker on the transaction. We have a rotation, so they're the next banker. And I was talking with them yesterday. They want to come in and talk about structure and how to plan it, and as we'll have a call with PFM, and we'll work through all that and bring that to you. This one is a little different. Normally we're just building schools. There's also a holding school that we built for Verdi. Verdi Elementary in Boca is under construction right now. We had to build a holding campus to move the kids to, and that holding campus will be used for Verdi this year. The kids will go back to Verdi, and then Addison Meisner students will move into it. So we'll be using it for 2 years. We're going to use it for 2 years, and then it'll be torn down. We're actually leasing the portables, but there's a lot of infrastructure that had to be built. That infrastructure will all be used for a school that'll be in next year's COPS issue, 05C. City of Boca Raton is giving us the land to build the school on. So the site will be used for a holding school for 2 schools and then a permanent school. So that the cost of the holding school, it's only there for 2 years. So we're going to amortize that first. So we're going to have a Schedule 1 and 2, so I can make sure the costs associated with that are paid off. So it's a little different. It's not unusual in the world of public finance, but it's something different for us.
So as a citizen of Boca Raton, would you repeat where the I as a citizen?
The holding school is located next to Don Estridge. If you know where Don Estridge Middle School is, near where the old IBM site used to be. So we have a school, Don Estridge is there, and right next to that we built a temporary campus. If you want, I'll bring you pictures of it. We do this with the Construction Oversight Review Committee. I can bring pictures in. See what it looks like.
When all that came up, didn't the parents at Estridge basically make the board change its mind on what to do?
The board at Estridge was unhappy with where we were going to site it because
It took
it was
away
going
the-
to be on their track.
Right. It took away some of their tractor there.
Took away some of the track, and so they changed and shifted the position of the school so we didn't run over the track and didn't impact the kids at Don Estridge.
Done.
We want to make sure that all the kids have the tools they need. They do. The school, Verity, is in a. Actually, I've seen pictures. It looks like a wonderful site for them. We also brought in extra technology so that it's a 1-to-1 ratio for the kids in the school with Google with Chromebooks. So they're getting an extra dose of technology that will move with them into their new school. So I've seen videos. There's videos online showing the kids in the classrooms and how they like it. But it is rented portables, so it's a little different. We were very nervous when the hurricane came through because it wasn't a regular building. They're rented portables. But we were very lucky, and hopefully we'll have one more season. Get through this season and one more season without a problem, because the rented portables, they're tacked down, they're tied down, and they're on concrete pads and everything else, but it's not like a real building. So the risk is all on the people we're leasing from. We're leasing those portables, so we're not responsible for those.
Separate kids inside.
There's a lot of moving parts when we start to talk about building schools, so I'll try to bring that into the discussion next month.
Let me ask you, you said that the B of A people were going to come and discuss the structure or marketing of
They're
the
talking
experience?
with me and with PFM about the structure. I think they just want to make sure his comment, he wants to be as helpful as we want him to be, how involved we want him to be. So he'll come in, and PFM has their own desk, the financial advisor side, David Moore and Laura Howe. I don't think that they need Bank of America to come in to talk about this, but Bank of America wants to come in and talk about it. We'll certainly work with the underwriters to look at what's going on in the marketplace to make sure we're offering this in a way that will appeal to investors so we get the best possible price.
As you know, there's been a considerable amount of considerable number of articles about the state of the muni market and the fact that it's become so heavily institutionalized that and so I guess the problem is the spreads are the spread is de minimis, but they price them too cheaply, and I'm sure y'all are pursuing that with them. But it is kind of alarming to think. I mean, the old line that back with the Merrill Lynch or back when there was one, or these other retail firms had some sort of advantage because there was a substantial market for retail customers, and there really aren't many retail customers anymore.
Right.
So,
well, I think one of the advantages we have using PFM, they have their own desks, so they know what the market is. I mean, they're not issuing debt on their own, but they have a trading desk to facilitate. When we did a refunding a year or two ago, and the prices we were getting from the underwriter didn't make sense, and we pulled the deal. We've only done it once, and you don't do it lightly, but we pulled the deal off because it didn't make sense. And I think the underwriters at that point realized. If we're not getting the prices we're expecting, we're willing to pull it.
Yeah, I'd rather pay more in the spread and have them sharpen up what the pricing on the issue itself.
And when we do an RFP for underwriters, and I know you've participated in that in the past, but we set it up and we don't lock in the fee for the underwriters because that is so market driven. There's no way we could lock that in 2 years ago for a deal we're going to do 3 years from now. I mean, you have to have that flexibility because it makes a huge difference. You have to compensate them, and in the scheme of things, you're going to pay them a small amount of money that's going to save us a tremendous amount of money on interest expense for the next 25 years. So we want to do it to have the most efficient cost of capital we can possibly get in whatever way it takes to get it.
It sounds to me like that that is largely, or at least if you read the New York Times, it's disappeared to some extent. So.
Yes, it has. And they do compare. They look at what we're seeing in the marketplace, and we make sure we're getting something competitive. But we've seen a lot of changes with the underwriters, and a lot of people still, I mean, years ago with the recession, a lot of people changed firms, and a lot of firms closed.
Right.
We're seeing that again with a lot of people shifting, and a lot of people.
It ceased to be a very profitable business. That's
right.
That's the reality of it all.
That's right.
It's really quite true.
So we have a lot to talk about at the next meeting, and the next meeting is the annual appreciation breakfast, so come hungry. We'll have a full breakfast for you in December.
Now, is that going to count against us in all those sunshine rolls that we receive something of value to?
I think the point, and I was listening very carefully when he said no lunches, I think they mean don't have the lunch during the meeting.
He didn't say nothing about breakfast.
And we always do the breakfast first, so that you're not eating on camera. So I think
I
we're
think
good.
legal's concern is always that we're having a discussion about something that might be voted on later. And poor Julianne is like, she doesn't even want us to ride together in a car anywhere, even though people would say, well, why aren't you carpooling? Well, because they might be talking.
Yeah.
Right. We're good, and Blair is always here, and he's really good at telling me no, and so I think I've been doing it long enough. I haven't had a no in a long time, but we
like to
try to
talk
make
with my
sure
mouth
we
full.
take care of you during meetings.
I think a point of interest, the state legislature, I don't think is subject to these
No.
rules.
No, they're not.
No. They passed the laws that make us subject
Yeah, that's
to
right.
it.
So that's in lieu of their own response.
Yeah.
All right, well, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
Thank you all very much. I'll see you in December.